guys, how's it going? It's Al. Week 8 is here, and I've got my quarterback rankings for your friends and family leagues. We're going to break down the top 12 quarterbacks on the week, the QB1s, the guys that you should be starting in your leagues this weekend. So to answer start-sit questions, it's as simple as if you have a quarterback who is higher on this list, you should be starting him over somebody who is lower on this list. And I would assume that you have to have somebody. There's only two teams that are on bye this week, the Chiefs and the Chargers. Two very quality quarterbacks, guys who are perpetual quarterback ones on the season, but we're back from the wasteland that was week 7 with 4 QB1s. Well, maybe Matthew Stafford isn't right now based on the Rams offensive line, but 4 guys who have been popping as QB1s pretty much all season long. So let's take a look at the list. Let's go.
He's a legend.
The Smiz Gang Listener League is posted for week 8. It is a 5,000 person tournament, 5,000 entry tournament. It's $10. It is 3 max and it's absolutely no rake. The best draft. It does not exist in the lobby. The only way to get in is through my links. So go to smizzle.tv/links. You'll find the link to the Listener League in there, as well as links to everything else that I do. My Twitch stream, I'm live 6 days a week. My Instagram account, all of my different socials, my article on ESPN, which is Best Buys, the links for everything exist in the link tree. So go to smizzle.tv/links and join the Listener League today, because it's probably going to fill at some point on Saturday. So make sure that you get your entries in early. The number 1 quarterback on the list this week has pretty much been the number 1 quarterback every single week, and that's Josh Allen. He is averaging 31.8 fantasy points per game. Absolutely absurd. The only week this season that he scored less than 30 fantasy points was week 4 against Baltimore, where he still had 24.5. You have a 30-point expectation every time that Josh Allen and the Bills take the field. I guess week 7 he didn't score that, but that's because they didn't play a football game. So hopefully those of you who had Josh Allen at least made it through last week. It's tough to go from a guy that's just going to post 30 plus points at quarterback when no other quarterbacks are doing it. This is a year where the elite quarterbacks are worth so much more. Usually the band of scoring at quarterback has been very narrow between the number 1 and the number 12 quarterback. But right now, like the top 3 or 4 have been consistently so much better because the running quarterbacks and also the passing quarterbacks on the team that throw the ball more than expectation have just had such a higher floor and ceiling than everybody else. Number 2 is Jalen Hurts. Now, I had mentioned how Josh Allen is averaging 31.8 fantasy points per game. That's absurd, right? On any other year, Jalen Hurts would probably be your clear-cut number 1 quarterback, averaging 25.6 fantasy points per game. He's averaging like 6 points less per game. And he would be like the number 1 of all time had this not been. Like, he would have been a clear number 1 in other years. But like, Josh Allen is so far and away the number 1 guy right now. Jalen Hurts has a solid matchup against Pittsburgh in this spot. He provides you that great floor with his legs. He has 6 passing touchdowns so far this year and 6 rushing touchdowns so far this year. The beefed up passing offense that they have, the wide receiver room, the tight end in Goddard, provides him with so much upside on top of just being a running quarterback who has to get you there and then get you like 20 or 23 fantasy points. He has that 30-point ceiling this year. We've seen him flex it twice, 37 points against Minnesota, 30.6 points against Washington, coming off of a bye week. And 2 of his last 3 games have not been as stellar. Against Dallas, only 17 fantasy points. Against Jacksonville, only 17, 16.96. Let me round up here, right? And sandwich in between them a really good game against Arizona where he scored 27.66. Definitely has a 20-plus point fantasy expectation this week in a good matchup. You're obviously playing him with fervor if you haven't. There's no reason for you to get nervous. Now, right behind him, I have Joe Burrow. Coming off of 2 massive weeks, right? Joe Burrow had just kind of been bopping along for the first 5 weeks of the season. And then week 6, bam, 35.5 points. Week 7, bam, 42.24. He palindromed right around the decimal point in terms of his fantasy point and his fantasy output. 3 touchdowns each the last 2 games. It's not about volume when it comes to quarterback scoring. It's about efficiency. Efficiency for quarterbacks partially is about, people think, oh, efficiency, what is their completion percentage? No, it's about their passing touchdowns is really what it is. Like, you can have a quarterback have you a 30-point fantasy day and throw the ball 20 times if they throw for long touchdowns. And that is something that has come back to this Bengals offense, partially through Tyler Boyd, partially through Jamar Chase, who has had 2 fantastic weeks as well. But crazy enough, Joe Burrow has been more efficient on the ground as well, with 20 plus rushing yards each of the last 2 weeks and a touchdown on the ground each of the last 3 games. Joe Burrow slides way up my board to number 3 this week, going up against Cleveland, who we've been attacking every which way. You can attack him with running backs. You can attack him through the air. Cleveland's defense leaves a lot to be desired. Behind him at 4, Lamar Jackson. Now, we've seen teams start blitzing them a lot more, and when blitzed, Lamar Jackson has not really provided a lot of efficiency with his arm. Now, the first 3 weeks were stellar, and maybe it's a little bit of anchor bias that I'm a Lamar Jackson believer. I think that he is a fantastic fantasy quarterback. This is a pass rate over expectation team. They are not the ground and pound Baltimore Ravens that they were in previous years. They throw the ball more often now than the average team, but they're going to have to figure out how to get Lamar Jackson a little bit more efficient, back to where he was earlier in the season. We saw Rashad Bateman come back last week. I think that helps. Hopefully the addition of Deshaun Jackson pulls safeties off the line, which opens things up a little bit more for him with his legs. We are getting 10 rushing attempts per game, so the floor is there as always. No rushing touchdowns for Lamar Jackson in any of the last 4 games. I think that we're going to see a bounce back here from him on Thursday night under the bright lights against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who really need to rebound themselves, as they have not looked like a good football team, but they are still a stout defense. They are kind of still a pass funnel, and they're giving it up through the air, as we saw against PJ Walker in week 7. So Lamar Jackson's my number 4. At number 5, right behind him, is Kyler Murray. We have not seen the Kyler Murray that we've wanted to see in 2022. 20.3 fantasy points per game. That is well below his expectation. We have not seen but 1 300-yard passing game. We have not seen but 2 multiple touchdown games. In week 4 against Carolina, in week 1 against Kansas City, he threw for 2 touchdowns, 1 or less in every other game that the Cardinals have played this year, and only 2 rushing touchdowns for Kyler Murray. So few and far between. He does have Nuke Hopkins back. He has been a more efficient quarterback with Hopkins in the lineup versus out of the lineup. They replaced him with Hollywood Brown for earlier in the season. Then they kind of swapped out because of the unfortunate injury. I really wanted to see what this offense was going to look like with DeAndre Hopkins on one side and Marquise Brown on the other side, and Zach Ertz kind of running the short to intermediate, and then Rondale Moore scooting around finding open spaces. But we're not going to see that probably until like week 13 or 14, once Hollywood gets back, and hopefully they're in the playoff hunt at that point where these games are going to matter. But in terms of those people who have Kyler Murray on their fantasy teams, it's been tough sledding, but he's still a QB1. He is still in the top 5 for me, just based on that potential. The floor based on the rushing yards, 26 or more each of the last 4 games. The possibility for rushing touchdowns. They have to score points. They have to win. And this is a game on the road, weather controlled in Minnesota, where that's defense that can be had a little bit this season. So I want to see Kyler Murray have a good game this week. He is my QB5. QB6, Dak Prescott. A little bit rusty last week. Only threw the ball 25 times against Detroit. Once they got up in this game, the game really slowed down in terms of pace in the second half. 12.28 fantasy points really was not enough. They get Chicago this week, coming off on a short week now after the Monday Night Football game in New England. Now they're going to travel to Dallas, a home game here for him. He has all of his weapons on offense. Dak Prescott, now with a game under his belt with the hand injury that he had suffered and all that time off, I think that this Cowboys team puts up another 24 to 35 real life points, and real life points is more of a predictor of quarterback scoring than just about anything else. The total in this game is only 43, but the Cowboys favored by 10 in this one, making their team total basically like 26.5. Anything over 24 is really solid in terms of fantasy points over expectation for quarterbacks. I like Dak Prescott in this spot. If they get to a situation where they're going to slow it down in the second half, it's very likely that it came on the shoulders of Dak Prescott actually completing passes that go for touchdowns in the first half. Love high team total quarterbacks. I've got Dak Prescott ahead of Geno Smith at number 7. Take a couple of seconds and go to smizzle.tv/charity. Every single dollar helps as we make our march towards $50,000 raised by the Smiz Gang community. That's you. The bonus is every $10,000 that you guys raise, I will personally match $10,000 hopefully getting to a goal of $100,000 by the time December 31st rolls around. All of your donations are completely tax deductible. They go through Tiltify at smizzle.tv/charity. They'll send you all of the tax paperwork that you need once you donate. Every single dollar helps. So please, if you enjoy the content, if you've won money this season, or if you just have a couple bucks laying around, and I guarantee you that most of the people in my community do have a couple of bucks laying around, go and donate to No Kid Hungry, providing school breakfasts and lunches to food insecure kids all across this country. The fact that Geno Smith has worked himself into like a top 12 role week in, week out is astounding me. We've had 2 down weeks from him in terms of fantasy output, but those are 2 games that they won against the Chargers and against Arizona. Seriously? Like this is what we're doing. 2022, life comes at you fast, especially with DK Metcalf out now with a torn patellar tendon. If you told me that I would be really happy in daily fantasy to play Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, and Marquise Goodwin stacks and be like, yeah, you know what? That may be the way to go in a week of daily fantasy in 2022. If you told me that in like August, I'd have said you're crazy. But here we are. Geno Smith, my QB7. My QB8 is Kirk Cousins, Minnesota, playing at home and coming off of a bye week against Arizona, who's been extremely friendly to opposing quarterbacks. Now, averaging 17.1 DraftKings points on the season, Kirk Cousins has been solid, not thrilling, but nice. I'm hoping that the pass game that they have been pretty efficient with translates more to touchdowns, as we've seen a couple of long touchdowns from the running backs. Dalvin Cook had like a 50-some yarder in their last game in week 6 against Miami. Like, this is a spot where Justin Jefferson is going to eat, because he eats like literally every week. But the other parts in this pass game offense, coming off of a bye week against this Arizona defense, should thrive. Guys like Thielen, guys like Irv Smith, even like a KJ Osborne can do very well. I want to see more from the running backs in the passing game. They're not really targeting Dalvin Cook, and they're not really targeting Alexander Mattison a whole lot. So we're going to need to see more out of the other parts in the offense for Kirk Cousins to have like really, really solid weeks. It can't rest solely on the shoulders of Justin Jefferson like it has so far through their 6 games this year. We need to see more of like Cincinnati Bengals type offense, where the running backs get targeted enough to kind of buoy the floor on passing yards for Cousins to see him over 300 yards. And we need to see those other parts, the T. Higgins, the Tyler Boyds, the Hursts on this offense, being Thielen in the red zone specifically, KJ Osborne be a little bit more explosive between the 20s, and Irv Smith get a little bit more loose against linebackers and safeties for Kirk Cousins to have kind of a ceiling game. I've got him at 8, but it's very tenuous, because at 9 is Tua Tagovailoa and this Miami offense that I really, really like an awful lot. That just, quarterbacks matter. They clearly do. They always have. Detroit has given up 24 or more points every single week this season. As I said before, real life points translate directly to quarterback scoring more often than not. So for fantasy, Tua can easily pass Kirk Cousins in this spot, but like, I think that Cousins is in slightly a better spot than Tua, just because I think that they're going to want to establish the hell out of it, as they have been doing very successfully with Raheem Mostert at running back. So that has him dialed back a little bit for me versus Cousins. If you want to have Tua ahead of Cousins, if you want to have Tua ahead of Smith, just because of the presence of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, that's fine. Tua needs to shake the rust off a little bit after the multiple week absence based on the multiple head injuries that he had. After the game, he said himself that the speed of the game, the pace of the game against Pittsburgh was a little bit fast for him. He made a bunch of really bad throws, interception worthy throws, if you were kind of grading him in a PFF sort of way. 15.9 fantasy points last week, 17.9 on average, but that includes the 3.4 against Cincinnati. It also includes the 43.8 that he put up against Baltimore. But like in his other games, 15.9, 11.4, 14.8. We need to see more. We need to see more out of Tua. And we can't just live off of that one output. Of course, he's got a ceiling. Every quarterback with weapons that Tua, or like Tua, has a ceiling. But the guys that I have ranked ahead of him, Geno Smith and Kirk Cousins, have been more consistent and have had a higher floor than Tua has had. Now, if he can shake that rust off, if he can catch up to the speed of the game with another full week of practice and film study and everything else, Tua is actually pretty good, and the weapons around him are absolutely elite. So I would love to see the deep passing threat come back here in week 8. My quarterback 10 on the week is Derek Carr. Now, this offense has been very much based around the running game and Josh Jacobs, who's got like 84 touchdowns the last 3 games, averaging like 206 fantasy points per game in each one of those weeks. Derek Carr is averaging 17.1 fantasy points per game on the season, has not scored 20 plus points in a game since week 3, where he had 23.8 against Tennessee, 13.5 against Houston, 17.9 against Kansas City, 11.5 against Denver. New Orleans plays kind of a slow down game. They don't want to be fast paced. They have had so many injuries to their wide receivers that they can't throw the ball a ton. They do have Chris Olave, and then they're putting it together with spit and bubblegum on the outside. If they get Michael Thomas back and Jarvis Landry back, this game could pace a little bit faster than their last few games have paced. And Las Vegas being on the road always is usually more of an indicator that you're going to have to throw the ball versus pass the ball. This game does have a very high total. The Raiders are favored. And while Lattimore may be on the other side of Devontae Adams, as those pieces get more healthy, we need to see Waller come back. Like, the island of Foster Moreau just isn't doing it for me. We need to see Renfro more involved in this offense. They have not been a high volume offense, not really, or passing offense, not throwing it more than 34 times a game, any of the last 3 games that they've played. I want to see that pick up before I can move Derek Carr higher up on this list. Jared Goff has been dragged along in terms of fantasy purposes because his team is playing from behind so often that he's kind of forced to throw. Miami has given up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. He's coming off of 2 really, really bad games. 5.5 fantasy points against Dallas in Dallas, and against New England in New England, 7.86 fantasy points. This has got to be a bounce back spot. No touchdowns in either one of those games. 2 of the 3 games prior to that, in week 4 and week 2 against Seattle and Washington, he threw for 4 touchdowns in each of those games. Now, while I'm not expecting that sort of output, the Lions have tended to be more in pass script situations as they've played from behind so often. And if that defense, especially early in the game, as Miami's done really well on their opening drives when they get to script out the plays for that drive, and Tua's been extremely efficient on those, it's very likely that Detroit is going to be playing from behind for the majority of this game if things go according to that sort of script, where Miami is going to be extremely efficient early, score a touchdown or field goal early, even though they're only 3-point favorites in this game is Miami. And Detroit, as long as they're not playing from ahead, where they will try to establish the hell out of it. Whether DeAndre Swift is back, I would prefer DeAndre Swift be back for Jared Goff because he's a better pass catcher. He adds one more weapon. It was shown that Amon-Ra St. Brown did not have a concussion, but he was showing signs, and so therefore he had to be held out of that last game when he left early. They need weapons around Jared Goff. Jared Goff is not an elevator of talent. He can't make the players around him better, so he requires a really good system and or really good players to be able to get open for him to just kind of deliver the ball. He's a facilitator of offense. He's not somebody who is going to make offense happen. So I'm assuming that they get Amon-Ra St. Brown back for this game because he was cleared, did not have a concussion, so none of that. He will be back in full and ready to go. Gotta hope that the ankle and shoulder injuries for DeAndre Swift improve so he has one more weapon, because then once you get those guys back, everything else kind of falls into place below them. You don't have to have a guy like Khalif Raymond be your number 1 target. Somebody like Hawkinson can run around without getting bracketed. Once you can take pieces away as a defensive coordinator from that Lions offense, they become extremely predictable. Very tough for Goff to have big days. I think that a return to like that 18 fantasy points that he is averaging on the year is extremely likely. That's why he is my QB 11. And you'll notice that one guy has not been mentioned yet. A total of 43.5. And he does not run the football. An offense that, in the words of Rex Ryan, looks awfully slow. Tom Brady is my QB 12 on the week. The first time in like 2 decades that his team has been below 500. The Ravens can be had through the air. If not for an early dropped pass, that would have been a touchdown, an easy touchdown for Mike Evans. Tom Brady would have started that game off, and the Buccaneers would have started that game off on an extremely good foot. And getting off on the good foot is, in my opinion, morale is very low for the Buccaneers. So if you hit the plays that you expect to hit, specifically early in the game when you're working off scripted plays, things tend to go a lot better. Morale, chins stay out of chests. morale stays high. He still has thrown 8 touchdowns to only 1 interception, so like his efficiency hasn't been horrible, but only multiple touchdowns so far in 1 of the 7 games that the Buccaneers have played. And that was in week 4 when they were playing from behind the entire game. They were down 14-0 early against Kansas City in week 4 on like the Sunday night game. Gotta see this offense perform. I don't know if they're able to. Too much off the field distractions. 16.3 fantasy points a game for Tom Brady. It's gotta bounce. He is one of, if not the proudest quarterback in the league, on a position that everybody is proud, but he has that chip on his shoulder always. Even after all the chips that he's won, he does not want to go out like this. He is going to demand that this team do better. He's going to demand that he does better himself. Hopefully, he can compartmentalize all of the off-field problems that he has dealt with this season, as real as they are, and this offense can start executing a little bit more, because Evans has not been getting the separation that he's been getting in past seasons. Godwin has not been getting very much separation or been open, even though he has been successful so far from a PPR standpoint this season. They've got to start scoring touchdowns. I think that he might get 2 in this game, throw for like around 300 yards with 2 touchdowns, which is more than enough to satisfy remaining a QB1. But you're on thin ice, Tom. We got to see it. We may need a slump buster. You may have to like go eat a double bacon chili cheeseburger with like some cheddar fries and an extra thick milkshake and get off of the avocado ice cream and all the perfectly healthy things. You got to get some of that fat in you. You need something, brother, because you're going to have to turn this season around. Look out for another video right there.